always reach out. If you are in a situation where you have a relationship that should have been intact or was intact, and you say, oh, should I reach out? Yes. The answer is yes. If you're asking the question, you've answered the question. Always reach out. Because what these regrets are doing, and this is why I think it's so powerful, is that these 4 core regrets, as I say in the book, operate as a photographic negative of the good life. If we know what people regret the most, we can reverse that and know what they value the most. And what do we value? We've been talking about some amount of stability, the chance to do something, to learn and grow. We want to do the right thing, to be good, and we want to have connection and love. That's what it's about.
Thank you. Really, thank you, everyone, for being here on the What's Essential podcast. I'm Greg McKeown, your host, and I've been thinking about a particular thing of late. I've been thinking about this pandemic and its, how it's created this involuntary reflection. Like, you go to your room and you think about this and don't come out until you do. I was certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, and then even now as it sort of keeps going on and on in this hybrid world. And I think one of the things that happens in that reflective period is, whether we want to or not, we find ourselves facing regrets. And we might not like to face it for very long. It can be pretty awkward, quite painful, and so we want to push forward. But it seems to me that we have been taught that we shouldn't have regrets. And so as soon as we feel them, we push forward. And then we get stuck in them. We're trying to avoid them, and that means that we get stuck in them. And so my guest today is the one and only Dan Pink, of course, the author, the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Drive and When to Sell as Human, 7 books in all, I think. And he inverts this whole view of the matter in his marvelous new book, The Power of Regrets. And if you'll just engage fully as we have this conversation, we're going to discuss some, let's say 5 counterintuitive things that you can do right now to use regrets to your advantage in designing a life that really matters. Dan, welcome to the What's Essential podcast.
Greg, it's great to be with you. Thanks for that really nice introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, it's really my honor. Before we get to these concrete things and the research and everything you've been doing, I would love to get a sort of Reader's Digest version of your life.
Okay.
Which started with well, you tell me. How did it start?
Well, it's
your parents, Bernice and Paul.
Oh, that's good.
Dr. Paul.
How'd you? That's some good due diligence there.
Little something.
It started I was born in Wilmington, Delaware, in the eastern part of the United States. And when I was 6, my parents moved to Columbus, Ohio, and that's where I grew up. Columbus, Ohio, for your listeners who don't know, is a hotbed of social rest. It is the most quintessentially middle American place, with the possible exception of Indianapolis, that you can find.
What did your dad do? What kind of doctor was he?
He was not a doctor. He was a PhD, and he was a PhD in chemistry, and he worked for a nonprofit affiliated with the Ohio State University.
And siblings?
2.
Older, younger?
I am the oldest child. I have a younger brother who is very, very close in age to me. I think like almost as close in age as is biologically possible. And then a sister who is 6 years younger than I.
Do you get along with them?
Yeah. My brother and sister are great people. We get along fine. Yeah, I don't have and all of the conflicts in my life. I don't have many conflicts with my siblings. They're good people.
That's a nice thing to be able to say, I think. You went to Bexley High School.
I did.
Did I say it right? And you are now, of course, one of their notable alumni.
That says a lot more about the high school than about me.
But have you ever looked at this? Do you know the other notable alumni from your high school?
I have to say I don't have a clue, but I can probably think of somebody. The one person of significance is a cancer researcher named Judah Folkman. I remember he's passed away, but I think he went to Bexley High School.
Um, yeah, as well as R.L.
Oh, right.
Stein,
I didn't know that he went to Bexley High School.
from
I knew that
Goosebumps.
he was from Columbus. Yeah,
Yeah,
I knew that.
Bexley High
Oh,
School.
I actually did not know that. I'm learning something here. Yeah, no, he's from Columbus. He went to Ohio State.
Goosebumps author, 400 million
Yeah,
copies.
yeah, yeah.
This
So
is Bexley no.
I'm not gonna win. I'm not gonna win the gold medal for sales now in the
No,
alumni
no,
competition.
but Bexley's doing something right if they're churning out
Can I tell you?
Dan Dinks and R.L.
Can I tell you
Steins.
what they might be doing right?
Tell me.
I don't think it's that particular high school. I think that it has to do with so this is much more than a Reader's Digest version, Greg. But I think that one
Mhm.
of the virtues of my childhood, one of the great things about growing up in Columbus, Ohio, is that Central Ohio, in particular, and Ohio in general, has always had one of the best public library systems in the United States. The the way that Ohio, I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was a kid, and I learned this after the fact, Ohio had a very robust statewide funding mechanism for libraries. Like libraries in
Hmm.
Ohio and in Central Ohio in particular were always extremely well funded. And so when I was a kid, I spent a huge amount of time at the library. There was the town that I grew up in is a little town called Bexley, where I lived in Columbus for part of my childhood too, but I basically spent most of my childhood in this little town of 14,000 people, and they had an outstanding public library that I could walk to, a 10-minute walk from my parents' house. What's more, my mother, a former school teacher, would often pile the three kids into the back of the brown Chevy Impala, and drive to downtown Columbus, which was, you know, very like a 10-minute drive away, 10-minute, and take us to this massive, gorgeous main branch of the Columbus Public Library, which is on this block-sized building in Columbus, Ohio, in downtown Columbus. And she was just like, I mean, she probably was just so at the end of her rope. She's like, okay, guys, like just meet back here at 3, and
Just
go.
go.
And that was some of the happiest moments of my childhood, is roaming this giant library by myself. And I really think, Greg, that if I had not grown up in Central Ohio, I don't know if I would have become a writer. So we, joke about Bob Stein, but like he might have had, I don't know the guy. I know that he's from Columbus, but that he might have had a similar experience. If I had grown up in a place that didn't have well-funded public libraries that were so accessible to me in like literally, I go to the library like at least once a week.
Mm.
If I didn't have if I grew up in a place that wasn't like that, I don't know if I would have become a writer. I might have become a dentist or a point guard.
Well, it's a perfect time for a little transition because you almost didn't become a writer. You went to Yale Law
Yes, I
School,
did.
which of course is impressive enough, but also became the editor-in-chief of the Yale Law
Yeah, I'm
School.
not. You're doing some. I'm not. I'm not used to interviewers doing any research on me here.
But that's, I mean, people that know, and those that don't know, don't know. That's not a very profound thing to have said. That this is a big deal.
No, it's
Right?
actually
I
not.
mean,
No, it's not, because
it is.
no,
It
it's
is.
actually not, because I think you're getting it confused. There are multiple law journals in law schools, and so there's like the Law Journal, and then there's like the Law and Policy Review, which is
You were the policy
with the
review.
Law and
I see
Policy
that
Review. So it's not.
Volume 8, Issue 2 has your name on it.
I'm sure that it does. Yeah. So, but it was much better than the traditional Law Journal. It was much. We did a much better job in creating articles and research that was much more valuable to policymakers.
But you didn't love it at all.
Well, I mean,
Is that true?
yeah, let's go back to I grew up in this middle class family in the middle of America, and I was kind of risk averse, and so I went to law school basically because I got good grades in college, and I didn't have anything else to do, and I was risk averse, and I didn't really think about it, and that's a mistake. Like, not acting with intention, I realize is a mistake.
I don't know that you know that we have this in common, but I went to law school as well, but quit after about 9
Oh,
months
I did not
to
know
to
that.
pursue to pursue teaching and writing. You went further than that. I mean,
Yeah,
you
you
finished
have a
law
lot more
school.
courage than I do.
Courage, stupidity. Sometimes these things are hard to differentiate between. But it was still a relatively bold
So
move.
you
I mean, there
went there,
wasn't
you
that
went for
much.
9 months, and
Yeah,
then
9
what
months.
happened?
Yeah. Um, I came to the United States. I was studying in England at the time, and somebody said in passing, "Well, look, if you do decide to stay in the United States, then you should come and do A, B, and C." And I never did what they had suggested, but their question gave me permission,
I see.
you know, to 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 do something different. And what I wanted to do and knew I wanted to do was to teach and
Interesting.
write, in this kind of field. But I was, I'm in law school because that, keep your options open. This is
Yes,
sensible. This is
exactly.
a good
You got it.
opportunity.
That's the
All of that.
explanation. That's the explanation for me.
Now, for you, you shift from there. You become there's a journey, but a chief speech writer for Al Gore.
Yeah, well, I left law school and started working in politics, and ended up, because I was a pretty fast typist, ended up becoming a speechwriter. And one of the interesting
No, that's a modest way of saying that, though. I
Well,
mean,
actually,
what?
yeah, part of it also, I think one of the interesting things about politics, particularly campaigns, is that the staff level, they tend to be reasonably meritocratic because they're usually underfunded and understaffed, and they're chaotic. So usually the people in charge turn around and just look for someone to do something. And if you can, I'm not joking,
You're there.
right? It's
You're willing.
like, and it turned at one point in some job, someone turned to me and said, "Can you, like, oh my God, we need a speech. Can you write a speech?" And I'm like, "Sure." I had no idea, and I did it, and it was okay. And they said, "Okay, can you write another speech?" Yeah, and it's like, "Okay, I think you're a speechwriter now."
What was the last speech you wrote for Al Gore?
The last speech I wrote for Al Gore, I think, actually don't remember. I actually don't remember.
What was the first speech you wrote for Al Gore?
I don't think I remember that either. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I don't.
Does- Do you remember any
Oh
speech you
yeah,
wrote
no,
for
I
Al Gore?
remember a lot of them, but I don't remember the first or the last. The thing is,
What's the most meaningful speech you wrote for him?
the most meaningful. I think the most meaningful speech was one where, so we're going way back in time here. We're going back in time 25 years to now. In 1995, we had an act of domestic terrorism in the United States of America when Timothy McVeigh bombed the federal building in Oklahoma City and killed more than 100 people, including many children. It was a incredibly traumatic. Remember, this is pre 9/11 in the United States, and yeah,
I've been there
yeah,
to the
yeah.
building. I've been to the, of course now it's been
And
rebuilt and there's a
we had a there was a 1 year anniversary service that got a lot
yeah.
of attention, and the vice president, was the main person there, and it was, if I remember right, it was a short speech that really sort of what was about how a country can be both resolute and kind at the same time, and sort of trying to get that mix right was, I think, interesting. And I just remember it being, I'm not sure the speech was meaningful, but I remember being there and finding it meaningful. finding the experience meaningful. I'm not sure the speech was meaningful. The other thing I remember from that is that there were two different sites that we went to, and they put us in buses. Strangely enough, to go, the vice president went in the motorcade, and then a bunch of us went in buses because there were other dignitaries there. And I ended up sitting on the bus, maybe a 20-minute bus ride, 15-minute bus ride, with a lovely chat with a very garrulous United States senator named Joe Biden.
Hmm.
So I think I really remember the moment more than the speech.
Today, in the dark shadow of memory, we gather to seek the light.
What?
To find in this soil, nourished with a million tears, the harvest of God's healing grace.
Did I write that?
You did. For I believe in the words of the scripture, that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. The people who died here were victims of one of the cruelest visitations of evil this nation has ever seen. But we offer them today not pity, but honor. For as much as any soldier who ever fought in any war, they paid the price of our freedom. I could go on, couldn't I? You wrote this.
Yeah, I have to say the language isn't really ringing a bell, but a couple of there's one phrase in there that rang a bell. But here's the thing: I just want to just like disabuse you of some notions I think that are in your head, Greg. Here, okay, so speech writing in politics is not this effete, exalted, deliberative kind of endeavor. It is the closest analog to it is working in an emergency room, where in a tough neighborhood, where you're just stitching up bodies and hoping they don't die on your watch. I mean, we're just cranking out stuff all the time. When I was younger, I used to be able to write really fast. I completely lost that skill. But you're just cranking stuff out. You know what I mean? Like, you and I write books, okay? And you deliberate over the books, and you do 18 million drafts of it, and then you do it. And a lot of political speech writing is, oh my God, something just happened. We have to react to it. You have a 15-minute meeting or a 15-minute phone call about what your reaction is, and then you get on your computer. I mean, so it's not this. It's like being an ER doctor more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm actually looking right now. I have to get this in post. This is not the 1995 speech. When was the bombing? 1996.
No, I think the bombing was in 95.
So this is a 1996 speech that we're looking for here. So this is really the memorial service. That's what this was, right?
Yeah. Anyway, so that was not Gore, because I say that didn't sound familiar.
Yeah, you'd know that definitely trusted that you're like, I don't think so. Okay, here we go. Gore praised those present for their courage and faith throughout this crisis. You have touched a nation, he said, in every corner of the country, in churches and synagogues and mosques. Americans you have never met have prayed for your recovery because your faith has reinforced America's faith, and we pray America's faith has bolstered your own. Does that sound familiar to you?
That sounds like something where I started with a good sentence and someone fucked it up.
In America, terror will not triumph. We settle our differences with dialogue and debate. We do not steal precious human lives to express our discontent.
That sounds like something that I would have written. The terror will not. The terror will not triumph. The
terror will not triumph.
Yeah. I think that's because that's a good line. That's a very quotable line.
But beyond that, that didn't. This was a great experience, but you didn't see yourself spending all of your time in this world.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. In part because of, I think all of us try to figure out what we're about. I think, in some ways we do that throughout our entire lives. And the person we are at one point in our lives isn't the person that we become. And then that person isn't the person we then become. And one of the things that I was doing while I was working in politics is actually even earlier, from the time that I was in college, was I was always, quote unquote, writing on the side. And so even in the midst of doing other kinds of things, I would be writing magazine articles or newspaper op-eds or columns and things like that. And even when I was working in some of those political jobs, on the side, I was doing, some columns and things, and I wasn't getting paid for it because of ethics laws. And so eventually it occurred to me that this thing that I was doing on the side for free in many cases was
Could be the main
could be
thing.
the main thing. Exactly. And so it took a while for me to grow into that, I guess, or for me to discover that buried in this person was, at least at that moment, a writer.
By this point, you have married Jessica Lerner,
Yes.
and you decide, I'm sure together, to quit
Yeah.
this, to go independent. This is 24 years ago now,
Yeah.
a full generation ago.
Mm.
How did you both feel about that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that is, in contrast to all the other questions you've asked, which I'm not glad you asked. I'm glad you asked that question because I think there is some instruction there. So when we decided to do this, so basically what happened is that I realized, it's like, I don't think I don't want to work in politics the rest of my life. I see the path of what people become 10 years, 20 years later. That's not for me. I think I might be a writer. I think that I might be sort of coming out as a writer here. That might be what I'm about, but I got to give it a try. And I'm also not very good at working for other people and not very good at working in organizations. That's some of the bullshit that comes along with having a boss, even though a boss like Al Gore was a great boss. But just being involved in
Was
yeah, he
he?
was, even in the midst of being a bureaucrat, but he wasn't my only quote unquote boss. There were other people involved, and
I'm sure.
and just like going to meetings all the time, and then seeing people in meetings who don't do anything. And I found that very frustrating. And so I didn't know quite what to do, but I realized, like, I want to try to go out and do something on my own. But here's the point in this long-winded answer, is that when Jessica and I made that decision, we did it with our eyes open, wide open. So she did not quit her job. She did not
Mhm.
give up her health insurance. I did not go out and rent an office. I did not go out and hire staff. I went upstairs to our attic and cleared out some space and got literally a wooden door, like a door, from a place. There's a hardware store no longer with us in Washington called Heckinger's. Like, it's like a Heckinger's wooden door and two file cabinets, and my computer. That was my desk, and that was my computer. And we said, you know what? We don't, because here's the thing. I didn't pay off my student loans until I was like 36 or 37 years old. So
Yeah.
so I so so when I went out on my when I went on my own, we went out with our eyes wide open about how to do that, and keeping the overhead low. In the first year, Greg, when I did this, I actually did some corporate speech writing, which I really did not like, but which paid for diapers. And
Mhm.
and our plan was, like, let's do it for a few years and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, I just, I was, the good news is that, if it didn't work, I was employable doing other things.
Um, you've had this whole career now, quarter of a century. Uh, it's there've been. I mean, of course, there's always highs and lows in writing and publishing and books and so
Mostly
on.
lows.
But nevertheless, not for you though. There's I actually was at the Stanford graduation ceremony where Oprah
Oh,
spoke, um, and I was graduating from business school where she gave out a whole new mind to every single person in attendance. That moment. I mean, there have got to have been peak moments, but that to me at least was symbolic of something important, right? Like you something you've written, something you've, and not very far into this journey, really. Suddenly, Oprah's saying this. He has answers. Dan knows stuff, and he's named things that matter to me. I mean, these are among the moments along the way. Um, and yet, with all of that, I came across in the last page, I think it's the last page of the book, a comment from you. Let me see if I can find it now. You, of course, would know it, but I still want to find it. But it's where you're talking about your
See, this is your
regrets.
legal training come to bear here, because I feel now like I'm in a deposition, and you're reading back something I said before in the record, and you're going to try to catch me in perjury or something.
Well, that's not the intent, but you say something like, let's see if I can find it. Basically, you say you have several regrets
Yeah,
yourself, and one of them was to do with not being bold
yeah.
enough. But then you write the phrase "stay tuned," and I thought that meant something. I thought that meant you had, that you have bold things you're thinking about that you've been previously holding back from. Um, did I hear it right? I mean, it doesn't take a genius to make that connection. Isn't that what you're saying?
It's what I'm implying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I have a few ideas of things that I want to do, and and again, part of it I think goes to your earlier question, Greg, about sort of the risks that I took earlier on, were very calculated and deliberate, and I'm not like a very risk prone person, and I feel like I could have been bolder in a lot of different in the professional area. And I'm also at a point, and this goes to the idea in some ways of why I even wrote a book about regret, which is that I'm at a point in my life where I can look backward and I can look forward. And I have finally a fair bit of mileage on me, but I also have a pretty long road ahead, I hope. And I want to spend that time in the road ahead doing things that are important, that matter, that test me, that challenge me, and that contribute.
Yeah, I mean that right there feels something like the universal
I
drive
agree with you
within
completely.
people.
I agree with you completely about that. There's an old journalistic adage, which is always extrapolate from your own experience. You're not that special. And I use
Yes,
I use that in
that's
I use
good.
that in some ways to sort of test the validity. I I sort of feel like if I am interested enough in a subject that I want to spend a few years writing a book about it, that there are going to be plenty of people interested in spending a few hours to read it. Um, so
Mm.
so
Well, and something you're saying there is just completely real. When you decide to write a book like this or any book, especially if you've done it before, so you know what's involved, especially if you want to write, you don't just want to write a book, you want to write a really good book, a great
yeah.
book. You are signing up for years and years of thinking, then writing, then speaking and teaching and sharing. I mean, it's a multi-year commitment. And of
Well, you know
course,
that, right? I mean, you've lived that.
yeah,
So yeah, I agree with you, and I'll see you and raise you though. I think in some cases it's a multi-decade commitment. Uh, be,
I think you're
so
right.
I wrote a book. My first book was a book called Free Agent Nation, about the rise of people working for themselves. I still get press calls about that book. That book came out 20 years ago, and
Do you?
I still get calls from reporters asking about that topic.
What do you get the most calls for now still? Like, which ideas have still garner the most interest?
You know what? I'm not sure. I'd have to think that through, because like you're asking a hyper rational person a question that actually has an answer. So there's a right answer to this question. It's quantifiable.
A general
Yeah.
answer, a general
So
answer will not
yeah.
suffice.
So
This has to be
yeah, yeah,
data
yeah, yeah,
driven
yeah, yeah.
to give the
So I mean,
answer.
you're asking a question. I mean, again, let's go back to law. You're asking a question of fact here. So I would say I get a lot on. I get a huge number of inbound on the sales stuff that I've written. Huge.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, because that's a very specific must have within absolutely every business. It's not a nice to have. If there are not sales, there is no business.
Right.
And you can never stop doing it, because then you
Right.
will
And
not have a
I like to
business.
flatter myself to think that that book that I wrote called To Sell Is Human was a smart, thorough treatment of sales in a world where many of the books about sales were kind of vacuous. And
Mhm.
it was something that took that function, that enterprise seriously as you know, as a serious intellectual endeavor, and not this kind of slick back padding.
Pressure,
Yeah,
just more
yeah,
pressure, more
yeah, yeah, yeah.
manipulation. It was enthroning or re-enthroning an element of business. I think perhaps because of its absolute necessity, it's sort of, the things that we need the most, perhaps we're most willing to vacillate on the ethics involved, because it's like, look, a sort of do or die type of situation. So, and many,
Maybe.
many
I
other
think there's a
reasons we
simpler
get.
explanation, which has to do
Yeah.
with information. Most of our experience in the world of commerce, from the beginning of the history of commerce, was the environment was an environment of information asymmetry, where the seller had more information than the buyer. That allowed the seller to pressure. That allowed the seller to take the low road.
Hmm.
I think the bigger change that people are reckoning with, or individuals and organizations are reckoning with, is that we've gone from this world where buyers have not much information, not many choices, and no way to talk back, to an entirely new landscape where they have as much information as the sellers, all kinds of choices, and all kinds of ways to talk back. And to me, that has kind of reset the terms of this profession. And I think that argument that I made in that book is absolutely more right than wrong. But I also think that it got to people in a way that they said, "Oh, that this is naming something that I'm kind of that I've been feeling in my bones for a few years, but I didn't really know exactly what was going on. I didn't know how to articulate it, and this has given me the language to describe it, which in turn has given me the ability to see it, and also some tools for how to navigate it."
What do you think? Oh no, I'll be disciplined again. Uh, okay, coming to this book
Yes,
specifically,
the power of
uh,
regret. How looking backward
the
moves us
power of
forward.
regret. Yes. Well, let's say one of the five specific things I want
Yes.
to pull out
Okay.
from this. The first is the World Regret Survey. Let's just start with
Okay.
that. So well, tell us about this. What did you do exactly?
Well, I set up a website and asked people to contribute their regrets. And to my utter surprise, within literally a few weeks of almost no publicity, I mean, essentially no publicity,
Hmm.
we ended up collecting this point, we're at about 17,000. We now have about
Hmm.
17,000 regrets from people in 105 countries. And this incredible collection of regrets, the stories of human longing and aspiration and frustration and despair and hope and all of those, ended up
And
and
shame.
shame and guilt and um, quest for redemption. All of
Hmm.
those tales ended up becoming this incredible corpus of material that allowed me to make some insights into the nature of regret in a way that I don't think has been done before.
All the way through the book,
And
there
sorry
are
for using the
these.
word corpus, but you used the word enthroned, so I felt like I had to match you. Yeah,
And beyond,
yeah,
I will lose the battle. You know, well, all the way through the book, there are these selected statements of regret
yeah,
from people who have shared from all over the
yeah.
world, and they're it's hard to look away from
Mm,
them, because it is so painful.
mm,
I mean, just this morning,
mm.
so we have our little family discussion, little family council every
Really?
morning, and
How
yeah,
old are your kids?
and
They're
teenagers.
willing to do that?
Uh, to be perfectly honest, the hardest thing about it is getting us to stop,
Wow.
because yeah, they're real talkers, and yeah, it's an issue. We try and cut it off at half an hour.
Good Lord.
Um, yeah. But this morning, and maybe it's just because I'm long-winded, that might be part of it too. But this morning, as we were just gathering people together before we got to any of what we really needed to get to officially, I just out of the blue said, "Okay, what are your
Mm.
regrets from
Oh,
your
that's
life?"
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, what I got was total silence.
Interesting.
And I couldn't tell at first whether it was because they're so, they're still relatively
Yeah.
young, that maybe they didn't have, they've lived good lives. There haven't been stories of calamity in their lives, and they're making good choices. So in a sense, there's not much to regret. But then also, as we sort of left it for a little longer, the discussion started being, well, that's a pretty awkward question. Who
Yeah.
wants to
Yeah.
share? Who wants to share their regret? Uh, and then one of my daughters told a story about when she had gone babysitting once and was trying to show the parents how good she was. She was young when she was doing this, but how good she was, and everything she shared, she just went on and on for ages. And then everything she shared, she felt was actually not an evidence of being a good babysitter, even though she was trying to demonstrate that she
Okay.
was.
Okay.
You could tell the embarrassment,
Yeah.
even as she shared
Yeah.
it, was
Yeah.
there, even though she was laughing, telling the
Right.
story. Well, anyway, I think it's interesting that people don't really want to talk about it, but it's an awkward subject. What have you learned?
Well,
I
let
mean,
me
one of the
go
things you
back to your
learned.
daughter here,
Go,
because
go.
I'm gonna make a guess here.
Yes.
So I wonder whether telling that story, and you can go back and find this out, made your daughter feel worse about the experience or better about the experience. And I'm going to guess it made her feel better about the experience. I'm going to guess that the act of, and the reason I'm getting to guess this is because there's a lot of science supporting this hypothesis here, that the act of disclosure and the act of sense making that comes from telling the story is itself a relief to people. That's not number one. Number two, and I feel when she told you that story about her regret, did you think less of her or more of her?
I thought the whole story was really funny, and I mean, now that you're asking me that question, I wasn't evaluating it
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that way
yeah.
at the
Well,
time.
let me.
But
Did you
yes,
think?
I would say
Did you
better.
think?
Yes,
Oh,
no, I would
forget
say
about. Did
better.
you think less of her? This is what we forget about better. Did you think
Oh
less of her? No, I can't imagine
no.
that. Right. So this is the thing. This is what we're wrong about. We think that when we disclose negative things about ourselves, that we're going to feel crappy about it, and that other people are going to think less of it. And what a pile of evidence tells us is that self-disclosure itself is almost always inherently valuable. That we relieve the burden through disclosure, and the act of putting these inchoate feelings into words is sense making that relieves some of the pain. What's more, and the other big mistake that we make is that when we reveal negative things about ourselves, we think people will think less highly of us, and we're almost always wrong about that. And so, one of the key components in reckoning with our regrets is self disclosure.
When I was yeah, one of the suggestions that you have in the book that I really, well, at first, to be honest, I was like, "Ooh, I just don't know about that. I could see that going pretty badly." And it was a start a regret circle.
Oh, yeah.
um so the idea, well, you tell us, what's the idea of the regret
Get a bunch
circle?
of people together and talk about your regrets and help other people make sense of them and extract lessons from them. It's sort of like it's sort of like a book club, but you don't have to read anything. Well, you can read this book, but you don't have to read anything. What you do is you go around and I'll tell you, this is how I got into this topic in the first place. Is that I had a kid graduate from college, and I was at her graduation, and I realized that like I had all these regrets about my own college experience.
Mm.
I instead of burying those, instead of ignoring those or wallowing them, just mentioned it to a few people and found that they leaned in. So instead of recoiling from my regret, they were interested in it and they wanted to share their own. That this is a subject that people do want to talk about. So a regret circle is you go around, everybody picks like one regret, and then you help people categorize it, and you help people figure out what lesson to extract from it, and then based on that lesson, something to do about it. And I think you hit on a really important point here about disclosure. In this World Regret Survey, where we had 17,000 regrets from around the world, I gave people the option: if you'd like to be interviewed, please include your email. You know, no obligation to leave your email address. It's totally anonymous. I said, this is an anonymous survey, but if you're interested in being interviewed to talk more about this with Dan, leave your email address. And I expected we would get like in the between 5 and 10% of people volunteering to want to talk more about it. We got over 30%. Like basically 1 out of 3 people said, yeah, I cheated on my wife and you can call me and talk to me about it. Yeah, I fleeced my business partner. Yeah, you can call me and talk about it. Yeah, I really messed up by smoking too much or not saving money and now I'm 45 and broke. Yeah, come and talk to me about it. So
that's surprising.
it is, but that's what I'm saying is that
To
a
me.
lot of our it's like a lot of our instincts about this are wrong. That at the core of this book is the idea that that simply ignoring our regrets or doing this blithe, no regrets approach to life is a good thing, and it's not. And that's not a guess. That's what 40 years of research on regret tells us, and it's also what 17,000 people told me. That when we disclose our regret, when we confront our regret, when we use it as a signal for doing better in the future, regret actually has a incredible positive power.
There's so much to unpack there. First, I want to not miss this. The first actionable tool, we've talked about a few, but the first one I really wanted to emphasize is people can go to World Regrets Survey.
Yeah, World Regret Survey.
You can go to www.worldregretssurvey.com and write down what you regret.
Yeah. And you can also go to a map there where you can click on a country or a state or a province and see what people in Utah regret, or see what people in California or in the UK. Oh my gosh, we have so many in the UK. We have like about 1,000 in the UK. Or people in Chile, and we have the survey in Spanish, we have the survey in Chinese, we have gotten entries in Japanese, we've gotten entries in French, we've gotten entries in Portuguese.
So I filled out the survey myself, and one of the questions, I mean, I want people to even ask it right now as we're getting into this, is to look back at your life for just a moment and describe. Now, this isn't how you write it there because you want them to write a couple of sentences, but I want people who are listening to this to think, like, in one word, think about a significant regret that they've had, right? Just think about, a significant regret, one word, one picture, one image. It's already come. And you've already covered sort of why people should disclose this, at first, at least to themselves. But keep going here, because you have them write about it, even as just a sentence or two. One of the phrases describing this, you said, putting your regret in writing can defang it.
Yes.
And then this pattern, and so this is sort of the mindset behind this little action, right? Is this pattern of disclosure, compassion or meaning making, and then distancing. Can you tell us more about that pattern as a whole?
Sure thing. So this is so let me take one step back. So at the broad level, we have to think about how we deal with negative emotions. And here, when you analyze the regrets, there's not a huge amount of national difference in the content of people's regrets. There's actually far less national difference than I ever would have expected. However, there is a national difference on the notion of regret itself, because Americans are drunk on positivity. And so Americans especially love the philosophy of no regrets. And what the research tells us is that is a bad idea, that the only people without regrets are little kids whose brains haven't developed, people with neurodegenerative diseases, and sociopaths. Everybody else has regrets. Regret is functional. It makes us human. But you have to deal with it properly. And the way you deal with it is this. You can take your regrets and you can say, like, you feel that negative emotion, that stab of regret. You can say, you know what? Feelings don't matter, especially negative feelings. I'm ignoring it. It doesn't matter. Okay, that's a bad idea. That you become delusional that way. You can also go almost the opposite of that and say, feelings are the only truth there is. My feelings tell me everything. My feelings are the one universal truth. And if you can wallow in those regrets, that is even worse. That leads to despair. What you have to do is you have to say, oh, a negative feeling like regret. That's a bulletin. That's like, it's telling me something. It's information. The universe is trying to tell me something. Am I going to be open to receiving what it's trying to tell me? And then use that feeling for thinking and that thinking for acting. And then there's this process that you can do that begins with self-disclosure, as you say. And even if you're still skittish about revealing it to other people, as you mentioned, Greg, there's a lot of evidence about simply writing about it privately is it's self-therapeutic. James Pennebaker at Texas has done a huge amount of research on this. Then the next step is this. So you have to treat yourself with compassion, self-compassion. This is the research. Another University of Texas scholar, Kristen Neff, has done the research on this. Self-compassion, one of the most interesting fields that it was relatively new to me, and I found it incredibly compelling. You have to treat yourself with self-compassion. And that's a triangulation between these extremes, just as dealing with regret itself is a triangulation between extremes. We have the extreme of self-esteem, which there's some good parts about self-esteem, but self-esteem is not all good. It is comparative. It can lead to narcissism. It can actually make people less diligent when it's unhinged from actual achievement. So self-esteem is not all great. Self-criticism.
Sure.
Self-criticism. Okay. Now, I never even interrogated whether self-criticism was valuable. I just assumed that it was. And the research says it's not that great. It's actually like a small negative. There's very little evidence that the kind of self-criticism that you and I and many people who are listening to this do is effective. It's almost like virtue signaling to yourself. Look at me, I'm being tough on myself. But it's actually not effective. What's effective, Kristen Neff's research tells us, is self-compassion. Which and a way to think about that is that when we think about our self-talk, all right, we think about our self-talk. Your listeners don't know because we're not on video, but I am decked out right now in running pants, and I have underneath my sweatshirt a running t-shirt, and so I'm going to go exercise after this. And when I run, I will often, until recently, say, "Oh, come on, you lazy," and like just sort of rip into myself, and thinking that, okay, that's a good way to get myself going. And there's no evidence that it is. But I would never, if I were helping someone else run or exercise, I would never talk to them that way, ever. And so what you do is you treat yourself with the same compassion you would treat somebody else. You recognize that all these flaws are universal. You ask, in your case of your daughter, you say, do you think that you're the only person who has sort of talked her way into a corner because you didn't plan ahead? No, I don't think you are, really. All right. So self-disclosure, self-compassion. And the third one is self-distancing. That is, you got to take a step back to draw a lesson from it. And we all know this. We all know that we're better at solving other people's problems than we are our own. And there are various techniques you can use to self-distance. And so when we disclose, when we offer ourselves compassion, and then when we distance from the problem, we can extract a lesson from our regrets and apply that to do better in the future.
So staying with self-compassion for just a second, so I would describe that as maybe a second thing people can immediately do who want to do something with their regrets is take this self-compassion quiz that you talk about. This is from Kristen Neff. So they can go to https://self-compassion.org. Take that quiz. That's a good place to be able to start seeing whether you're getting that right tension, that right triangulation, to use that term. So let's call that number 2, immediate thing people can do. A third thing that you said, which I really liked, was with action regrets. Now, you're distinguishing action regrets from inaction regrets. But then with action regrets, you give a 2-step process for that. An action regret is you have done something that that you regret having done. And, inaction regret is you regret not having done something, right? I'm understanding that, right? And then, so with an action regret, the first thing you do is undo it.
If you can.
If there's something you can do to apologize, to put it right if you
Make
can. And
amends,
often you can't.
make restitution, anything that you can to undo it. There's a fellow in the, you regret getting a tattoo, get that tattoo removed. Uh, you regret, something more mundane. You regret painting your living room green, repaint it blue.
Right. Do what you can
Right.
do. And then the one I
Yeah.
loved especially was at least
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Tell us what that strategy is.
So what you do there, it's relatively straightforward, is you find a silver lining. And at the heart of regret is what's called counterfactual thinking. And it's something that human beings are pretty darn good at. We can imagine a set of facts that are counter to reality. There are two kinds of counterfactuals. There are upward counterfactuals. If only I'd done this, things would be better. There also are downward counterfactuals. You imagine how it could be worse. And what the research tells us is that upward counterfactuals, if only, make us feel worse. But because they make us feel worse, they make us do better. But downward counterfactuals, these at least, they make us feel better. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. So, you could say, like we talked a little bit about, not that it's my biggest regret or that significant in the grand scheme of things, but we can say, oh, I shouldn't have gone to law school, but at least I met my wife. You find the silver lining. I have a lot of on a more serious note, more sort of like really important. I have a lot of, especially women in the database, who say, my biggest regret, I married this guy. He turned out to be a complete slob, a complete loser, but at least I have these two great kids. And so you look for a silver lining, because sometimes simply feeling better is a good thing to do. But you can only at least action regrets. And this difference between regrets about what we did and what we didn't do is really fundamental to the architecture of regret. And what we have, we typically have more inaction regrets than we have action regrets, particularly as we get older.
I want to get to that in a second. The at least it approach is what I ended up doing with my daughter this morning. I said, look, at least, like, could it have been worse? At least the children were. And she said, well, they were all alive and asleep when they came home. I'm like, yeah, that's a really big deal in comparison to any regret you might have of how you happen to talk about it.
That's a good thing to do. And the other thing there is you say, okay, so, I give you a very, very easy thing for there. It's like, okay, if you say to your daughter, if your best friend came to you with this problem, what would you tell her to do? And what you do in that case that's self-distancing. That's a classic self-distancing technique. And what you can do in that case with your daughter is say, okay, what are the lessons that you learned from that? And so the lesson is, you know what, maybe just think before you start talking. Maybe you think, okay, before you have this encounter with these parents, like, okay, what are the 3 big points I want to make? What's the most important thing that they need to know? Rather than just do what a lot of us do, even as adults, which is just open our mouths, start talking, and see where it goes.
What do you mean by the 4 core regrets?
So the 4 core regrets are something that comes out of that World Regrets survey. And what I found, again, as I was exploring this topic, is that typically we grew, when scholars have looked at regret, they've looked at it by the domains of our life. So this is a family regret. This is a education regret. This is a career regret. This is a romance regret. This is a health regret. And when I was looking at that research and actually tried to do some of it my own with a quantitative survey of the U.S. population, you see results all over the place, and it wasn't very clarifying. And what I realized is that was not the important thing that was going on. That beneath that was a kind of a hidden architecture of regret, that around the world, people ended up with the same 4 regrets, and it didn't matter the domain of life. Let me give you an example. You mentioned boldness. Boldness is one of the 4 core regrets. Boldness regrets, if only I'd taken the chance. You're at a juncture in your life. You can play it safe or you can take the risk. People play it safe. They often overwhelmingly regret it. People who take the chance, sometimes they regret it, but much more often they don't regret it, even if it doesn't turn out well. And so here's the thing: it doesn't matter the domain of life. So you look at, like, so I have a lot of regrets where people say, 20 years ago, there was a man or woman who I really liked, and I wanted to ask him or her out, but I didn't, and I've regretted it ever since. That's romance. You got huge numbers of people who regret staying in lackluster jobs and not starting a business. That's a career regret. You have other people who regret things like, oh, I had a chance to travel, but when I was younger, but I didn't because I was a little bit nervous about doing that. That's like but all those regrets, even though they're in different domains, are about not taking the chance. And when you look at these, again, this incredible, I'm going to use the word again, corpus of 17,000 regrets, you find that around the world, people's regrets keep coming back to these same 4 things.
Tell me what the 4 things
Foundation regrets, which are regrets about basically not doing the work. I didn't save enough. I didn't save for money. I was frivolous. Not planning for the future. I didn't save for money. Didn't save money. I have people around the world who regret smoking. I didn't take care of my health. I didn't study hard in school, and now I'm paying the price for it because I'm in a dead end job. So foundation regrets are about establishing
sort of investment regrets.
Yeah, it's
you didn't
investing in the broad sense of investing, right?
Broad sense. Yes,
and investing investing in a sort of a stable platform for your life. And then we have boldness regrets. If only I'd taken the chance. We talked about that. Another category, very interesting category, small but fascinating. Moral regrets. You're at a juncture. You can do the right thing or you can do the wrong thing. People do the wrong thing, they regret it for decades. So these are people who regret. The 2 biggest regrets in the moral category were bullying kids in school and marital infidelity. Those are the 2 massive regrets. But there are other kinds of moral regrets too. It's basically, if only I'd done the right thing. And then finally, our connection. Go ahead. Yeah.
Let's stay on that for just a second, because you describe this in an interesting way. You say that sometimes the moral regrets people submitted in the surveys read like the production notes for a 10 Commandments training video.
Sorry for laughing at my own language.
And, no, I loved how that was like as if you were hearing it for the first time. I like it though, but I understand I'm not the first person to read this to you. You read this to yourself. Your books.
Yes, I do.
And you have Jessica read them out loud as well, because it's in the process of listening to the spoken word that you decide whether something is compelling and interesting and so on. I think it's a great tactic for writing. I feel like I should do that more. But I think that's interesting. Like, for example, and I don't want to go, of course, too far down the journey with it, but the idea of infidelity, because there seems to me to be a kind of message in all sorts of media and in all sorts of ways to suggest that there's no consequence whatsoever to a whole series of actions. And especially in this domain. And yet what you found is data to support what I have found in my life and coaching people and counseling people and listening to people deeply, is that they do have regrets around these, around actions they felt themselves were immoral. And so it's not helpful to have society say, oh, there's no big deal. It's everything's fine. It's like, yeah, but what do you do with the pain? What do you do with this personal guilt, not societal guilt? It's not. It's within us. Your thoughts?
I mean, I find these moral regrets kind of heartening, because what it suggests is that our nature is that we want to be good. I don't think that's true for everybody. I think there's some people who do something morally reprehensible and don't care. But I really do believe they're in the minority, and in a distinct minority, and that most of us want to be good. And so these moral regrets, I think, are affirming in a way. They say that, most of us actually want to lead decent lives. We want to do the right thing, and when we don't, we're haunted by it. Sometimes for decades.
I remember reading in the book a whole list of people who you identified as having said that part of their own beliefs include no regrets. You got Angelina Jolie. I don't believe in regrets. Bob Dylan. I don't believe in regrets. John Travolta. I don't believe in regrets. Fire, core walking, motivational maestro Tony Robbins. I don't believe in regrets. Headbanging Guns N' Roses guitarist Slash. I don't believe in regrets. And on and on and
Yeah.
on. Why is it so important to advocate that they have no regrets,
To them,
even when the data suggests they really probably do?
because I think it's a mix of things. Number one is that they don't want to reckon with their mistakes themselves. Number two, they don't want to reveal it to other people because they think that other people will think less of them. When in fact, and um, on both of those dimensions, they are flatly wrong. I also think that people think they're more special than they really are. So they feel like, they've heard this message that you should have no regrets, and they think that since they have regrets, something might be wrong with them. So instead, they bury that. What they don't realize is that
Yeah, there's
everybody has regrets. I'm telling you,
well, and
the idea that the idea of having no regrets. People who have no regrets, that is usually a sign of a grave problem. That's a sign that you might have brain lesions. It's a sign that you might have Parkinson's disease. It's a sign that you might have Huntington's disease. It's a sign that you might be a sociopath. Truly, the only people without regrets are people whose brains haven't developed or whose brains have been damaged. All of us have regrets. It's part of being human. And so the key there is, though, you have to recognize the universality of them, and you have to reckon with them. And once you do that, they're actually incredibly helpful to us.
starting quite early in my life. I'm saying certainly by the time I was, let's say, 19 years old, I was regularly asking people, what do you wish you'd done
Mm.
differently? And I I remember the first person who said to me, I wouldn't have done anything
Mhm.
differently. I remember that moment, and I remember this internal reaction in me of like the cognitive dissonance or the confusion of that for me, or the I don't know, there's a sort of like outrageousness of it. I was like, I don't even know what it means. I absolutely already by that age would definitely go back with all the knowledge you have from life to go back and do it differently. Of course you do it differently.
Do
What was
one
the
thing
point?
differently.
What
Gee,
was
I
the
wish I hadn't had that terrible cheeseburger back in 1973. Yeah, yeah.
right? What I I actually, thinking about it now, I haven't reflected on this for years, but I think I actually lost quite a bit of respect for the person I was talking to when they
That's
said
what
that.
people don't.
I just
That's what people don't realize.
Yeah, go on.
That they're in this performance. That they're performing that. Oh, everything is so great with me, and nothing's ever gone wrong, and I have no regrets. And they think that performance is going to enhance their status in other people's eyes, when in fact it has the exact opposite effect.
That makes so much sense to me. The fourth core
Yes.
regret was connection
Yes.
regrets, and I want to spend a bit of time on that. You referenced a few different things here, but the Grant study came up again. Tell us about
Yeah,
that
that's a famous
for those who don't know what it is.
study that began in the early part of the 20th century. It's a long longitudinal study of men. It happened to be all men, all white men actually, who were at Harvard, and they followed them through their lives, and in a really comprehensive way. So, looking at physiological measures, looking at psychometric measures, looking at intellectual measures to see who thrived and who didn't. It and then they expanded it to include men again of different socioeconomic classes, and they've expanded it again to have a wider group of people. But the TLDR, as the kids say, is that the only thing that matters is love and relationships. That if you want to know who's going to be happy and thriving, look to see, do they have people who they love and who love them. And professional accomplishment, physical health, those kinds of things have very little relationship to whether people who are truly satisfied in their lives. If anything,
You quote the
if
Harvard.
anything, the arrow runs the other way. That people who are generally satisfied in their relationships are more likely to do things that allow them to contribute professionally.
Yeah, I mean that's such an interesting reversal of what we're basically told again and again. You quote the Harvard Gazette from 2017 about
Hmm.
this longitudinal study, its findings. I'll just quote that back here: that close relationships, more than money or fame, are what keep people happy throughout their lives. Those ties protect people from life's discontents, help to delay mental and physical
Yep.
decline, and are better predictors of long and happy lives than social class, IQ, or even
Yep.
genes. That finding proved true uh, across the board among both the Harvard men and the inner city participants that were added later into the study. Um, this was the largest category from these core regrets that you found. Am I quoting that
Yes.
correctly? Uh, Therefore, what? Like, what does somebody do? Well, tell us a story. There was a story that you shared of one of these people that filled out your survey and that you worked with, talked to her and coached her through a process. Tell us about that.
Well, there were a few people. I mean, what you see with connection regrets is that people have a relationship, or perhaps should have had a relationship that was intact, and it suddenly starts drifting apart. Very few of the relationships that came apart in dramatic ways. Most of them came apart in slow, almost invisible ways. And so, in one case, there's a woman who had a very, very close friend in college, and they graduated from college, and they were still pretty friendly. And over time, they began to drift apart. And this went on for years and years and years and years and decades. And nobody wanted to reach out, and because they felt that reaching out would feel awkward and the other side wouldn't care. And one of the things that we know from the experience of all these people who have submitted connection regrets and tried to do something about them, not to mention what we know from a pile of research, is that we're wrong about that. That we're worried that it's going to feel awkward when we reach out, but it feels less awkward than we expect. And we worry that other people aren't going to appreciate our overtures when in fact they almost always do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The you quote 5 words from one of one of the leaders um, of the grant,
Yeah.
research, George Valant. Tell us what he
He
said.
said, summarizing that study, happiness is love, full stop.
5 words. He worked as the leader of that longitudinal study for 30 years. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? 30 years you're leading this one project and you're not the only leader of it. I mean, that tells you
Yeah.
about the importance of
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
this
it's a pretty
project as
amazing
a whole.
it's a pretty amazing project. I mean, the amount of research that they did and the kinds of things that they found from people, and they looked at all the things that we think really matter. You quoted a little bit of it before, Greg. They looked at things like IQ. They looked at things like genes. They looked at things even like physical well-being, and those things ended up mattering a lot less than anybody expected. That when we think about our lives, what gives it wholeness are other people, and when those relationships come apart, it feels bad. And when we believe that we're responsible for those things coming apart, again, they usually come apart through drifts, not through any kind of cataclysms. um, our instinct is not to reach out because we think it's going to be uncomfortable, and our instinct instead should be to reach out. If there's one lesson, I have to say this to myself, there's one lesson from this research on regret, is that these is to always reach out. If you are in a situation where you have a relationship that should have been intact or was intact, and you say, "Oh, should I reach out?" Yes, the answer is yes. If you're asking the question, you've answered the question. Always, always, always reach out, because what these regrets are doing, and this is why I think it's so powerful, is that these 4 core regrets, as I say in the book, operate as a photographic negative of the good life. If we know what people regret the most, we can reverse that and know what they value the most. And what do we value? We've been talking about some amount of stability, the chance to do something, to learn and grow. That we want to do the right thing, to lead to be good, and we want to have connection and love. That's what it's about. And I would imagine, Greg, in your coaching, no matter who you're coaching, ultimately the coaching comes down to these kinds of things. I think that vibrant, cohesive cultures have these things. They give people a sense of stability. Corporate cultures, organizational culture. They give people a sense of stability. They allow them to take a few sensible risks. They help people do the right thing, and they help them build close connections. This is that this negative emotion of regret, this thing that you've so well documented that people don't want to deal with, pretend doesn't exist, whistle past, actually contains the seeds for a life well lived. And that was a surprise to me in doing the research, but that's what I found so exhilarating about writing this book.
This reminds me of a story from Thomas S. Monson, who's he's passed away now, but he was the former president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he was really known the world over for service, for human connection. I mean, he was just basically kinder than the rest of us, and even among his peers, that's how they talked about him. That famously, for basically the majority of his life, he went and visited these, I think, 85 widows every Christmas and brought them, I think, a turkey, or they had a certain gift he would bring every year to 80 homes. And of course, it slowly went down and down and down. But there's another story behind all of that story, which is that while he was a young man, sort of, I suppose, maybe late 20s or something, he had been in a meeting, he's in a church meeting, and he gets this feeling, this prompting to leave and go see someone who's in hospital. And he just keeps putting it off. He doesn't want to be rude to the person who's speaking. He's not even, and then as soon as they sort of conclude, he rushes out even before the meeting's over, because he just keeps on feeling this. And he rushes to the hospital. He runs down the hall, and a nurse meets him there, and he says, "Oh, are you Tom Monson?" "Yes." He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. The patient died. He was calling for you before he did." So he wept, sat down and just wept. And all right, so that's regret, right? That's the experience. That's a connection regret in action. And in that moment makes a decision. I will never not follow a prompting like that, no matter what, for the rest of my life. And that literally is the great story of the rest of his life. I mean, it is an extraordinary story that follows, because where the rest of us, myself included, you have a feeling, oh, I probably should do that. Oh, that's probably the right time to go and do that. Make that call. Small and simple things, to reach out, to connect, to apologize, to say that you're thinking of someone, to care about them, whatever. It can be inconvenient, but it's small, or you feel a little awkward. And then you have that wrestle whether to do it or not. Well, he had an experience that made him make that decision one time for the rest of his life.
He's learning from his regret. I have a story in the book of somebody who has a very similar Monson moment, who had a friend who was seriously ill, and she wanted to call her friend, and she put off calling her friend. And when she heard her friend had taken an even worse turn, she put it off a little longer, and she called, and like Mr. Monson, the friend had passed. And she actually applied that lesson to other friends. This is why regret, while it's negative, it is instructive. It clarifies it. And so you could have said, "Oh, I feel regret. It doesn't matter. No regrets. It's okay. She died." You could do that. You could say, "Oh my God, I'm the worst person in the world. I'm a terrible person. This is the worst thing that has ever happened to anybody. I'm unique and the only person on the planet who's done this, and I'm terrible." No, don't wallow in it. You say, "Wait a second. I feel really bad right now. This regret is stabbing me, but that stab is telling me something. It's a news bulletin. It's a lesson that the world is telling me. If I'm open to that lesson, I can hear it, receive it, and apply it."
There is no shame in admitting a mistake.
Right.
After all, we're surely only admitting we're now wiser than we
Well,
once
let's
were.
hope so. Yeah, that's arguably what it is. This is why I'll give you another takeaway that I really like, which is the for your 5 concrete things to do, which is the failure
Yes.
resume. Uh,
Oh, that was no. You don't know how cool that is. That is literally number 5
all
on my
right.
list. It was exactly
So
what I was
let's
about to
talk
do.
about so
Go
the
tell us
failure
about
resume
that.
is great. It's an idea from Tina Seelig, who is a professor of practice at Stanford University, not at GSB where you're from, but at the engineering
No,
school.
hey, I know Tina, and I was with Tina in Norway when we saw the Northern
Oh, nice.
Lights, and we were there. Listen to this. This is a name dropping moment, if ever one has one. The Prince of Norway had invited us there for his innovation conference. All right.
So,
Aside, carry
so,
on with
but, but,
Tina.
but, so you know Tina, and you know how brilliant she is, and one of her most brilliant ideas is the failure resume, which is that we all have a resume, which is this list of our credentials and our accomplishments and how wonderful we are. She says you should make a failure resume, which is a list of all of your screw ups and setbacks and mistakes. And I think it's a great idea. And if you make that failure resume and go through it and once again try to extract a lesson from it, I think that it is revealing. It was for me because I've done this exercise, and what I discovered in making this failure resume, it was painful. I didn't like doing it, and I actually don't want to show it to anybody. I did not
Hmm.
enjoy doing it, honestly. But
Mm.
again, we learn in discomfort. We don't learn in comfort. We learn in discomfort. And in doing that, I looked it over saying, okay, what's the lesson that I learned from each of these things? And I realized I had been making the same mistake over
Same
and
two
over and
mistakes.
over, the same mistakes. And I don't want to say that I've eradicated that, but that act was clarifying to me. It's like, oh my gosh, I like I'm not learning anything from I'm not learning anything from my mistakes. I keep making them over and over and over again. But what you needed this very simple process of sense making and lesson extraction. And once I did that, it was transformative.
Yeah, I love the phrase sense making. That to me is different than even just drawing a lesson from it. Sense making, it's meaning making. It's what does this mean now? And changing that meaning by thinking and pondering it and so on. Now, let's just go back to this failure resume. So when you say you made a failure resume, like exactly what did you do?
I took a Word document. All right.
Okay.
And in Word, there is a function called tables. And I took
Okay.
a table and I made a table, and it was on the two columns, and then I don't remember how many rows, 2 columns. And in the left column, I wrote the thing that I'd screwed up. Took this job, like this job was a total waste. All right. And then
Okay.
I tried that venture. I tried some venture and it completely flopped. And then I said, then in the other one is like, okay, what did I learn from it? And there were some cases where it's like, okay, I don't know what I learned from it. It's like maybe I just had bad luck. Maybe um, and sometimes you reevaluate something as you have it as a failure resume, and you think, oh, okay, maybe that wasn't so much a failure as it was circumstance or something like that. But when I started listing these things, particularly in the professional realm, I
Mm.
realized that I was making, and I'm happy to talk about what the mistakes are. The one mistake that I was making was the mistake of not doing due diligence before going in. This is in some ways what happened with law school. I went to law school having, it's unbelievable, having never visited a law school, having never sat in a law school class, having never talked to a lawyer about what she did. That's crazy. Uh, uh,
You hadn't spent 10 minutes experiencing what law
I
actually
hadn't spent
was
I
before
hadn't spent
committing.
10 seconds. And the same thing is true with certain, like there were a couple of jobs I had early in my working life that were just freaking awful. And I
Mm.
realized like the warning signals were all there beforehand. I was just too blithe to think that I knew more than, I knew how these, how things worked. And when in fact I actually had done no investigation into how things had worked. And then the other one, a really important lesson is that it's like some of the things that have flopped in my life have I realized from my, at some level, I mean, this goes back to your stuff, Greg. I mean, it's an essentialism mistake in some ways, in that one of the areas that I flopped was sort of taking things on and not being fully committed. And not being fully committed to me was almost a guarantee of failure. Like, you might as well just not even do it if you're not going to be fully committed to it.
What's an example of that? Something that you took on without being fully committed?
Um, there was a business venture that I tried as a spin-off to one of my books, where and I didn't really want to run a business, but I had a partner who was a lovely guy, and it didn't go anywhere. It was a total flop, and I think a big part of it is that I didn't want to run this business. I had no interest in this business.
You had no
Yeah,
interest
yeah,
in
yeah,
it.
and I wasn't committed to it. I was sort of paying attention in a half-ass way, and that was one of the
Yeah.
reasons. That was one of the reasons for it. And so for me, that became a very useful lesson. Even things this is not a big deal, but even things like volunteer commitments. So if it's something like it's like, this is not a massive failure, but one of the things was I was on a board, and I felt like I didn't contribute anything over the 2 years or 3 years that I was on the board. It's like I didn't really accomplish or contribute anything. And the reason is that it was always an afterthought. It was always the bottom thing on my list. It was something that I was actually not fully
Mm,
committed to. And so as a
mm.
consequence, I did a terrible job. And that's really useful to me. But again, you figure that out with essentialism. You got to figure, you got to go to the core and figure out what matters, what's essential and what's not.
Yeah, I mean that's the heart of it, isn't it? I mean the heart of this is, well, you say something. Let me say it the way you say it, because I think this is really brilliant. You say that your regrets are a photographic negative, and I'm going to now say it, my words following that through, a photographic negative to design a life that really
Yeah,
matters. If that's why to do, that's why to create a regrets resume. Yes, it's painful, but it's data. It's
right.
really
Exactly.
rich
Exactly.
data
Exactly.
for and not just rich data about how people generally, you know, are living by default, not by design, but exactly how you do it.
Exactly.
The precise signature type default weaknesses that you have. And if you use it right, it becomes precise data for you to construct a life that is significant, that's meaningful, that's rich, that's essential. That's the whole idea. To me, that's the mindset shift that you are trying to bring about in the power of regrets.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I do think that this negative emotion gives us the pathway to a life well lived. And it's not super complicated.
And it's not
It's
super
really not.
complicated. The
It's
data,
really not. It's
no,
really not. Like
yeah,
like what 16,000 people have told me is that there's a few relatively small set of things that really deeply matter to them. They want to have a stable foundation. People do want a chance to lead a psychologically rich life, to do something in their limited time on the planet. Most people, not everybody, want to do the right thing, and we want to have connection and love. We want stability, we want growth, we want goodness, and we want love. And everything else is commentary.
and an interesting point you made about this, I thought, was what people don't regret. You said that fewer than 20 out of
Yeah,
this
yeah,
16,000, you know, data
yeah,
pool regretted having
yeah,
children. Now, obviously, that's plenty sad for the few that
yeah,
do. That's a whole volume for those people. But I was just thinking about this because it just came out. I think was it the Wall Street Journal yesterday had an article about this, or at least I saw it yesterday. That shows the census data that in the United States of
yeah,
America, the lowest increase in population
Yes.
since records
Yes.
began. So
Yes.
0.1% increase in
Yes.
population. And of course, there's multiple reasons for that. But among those reasons is fewer people having children. I mean, that is
No
clearly one
question.
of the
Yep.
reasons. And how can we be surprised about that? Now, there's lots of reasons people give. If you study this a bit deeper, of course, there's lots of reasons. But one of them, surely, is that it is not. It isn't being emphasized as always as a worthwhile contribution. I think, which is, of course, has massive ramifications for society as a whole, and for the continuation, for the continuation of the
Yeah, I mean,
species. Yeah,
what
your
I
thoughts?
don't know is, and I had some people who regretted not having kids. What we don't know from this research is what portion of people who never had kids regret not having kids. I don't know that answer.
Right.
I won't even
Sure.
I wouldn't even hazard a guess. What I do think is pretty clear is that having kids was almost a rounding error as a regret in the sample that of these 16,000 people from around the world. And I think what's interesting about that is that, and you see this comes out also in the research, is that it's our notions of happiness that that parents of kids, particularly little kids, in terms of their moment to moment hedonic happiness, are pretty low because it's hard, because you're cleaning stuff up, you're chasing people down, you have a gazillion demands on your time. And yet people don't regret it. Why? Because it's a source of meaning, it's a source of connection, it's part of who you are. And so again, to me, that dog that didn't bark is itself fairly telling. Again, I'm not saying that everybody should have kids. I don't believe that, but I think it's significant. I think the dog that didn't bark, that almost. I had so many people disclosing things about how I had, for instance. I mean, again, I don't want to get into sort of a politically contentious topic here, but I had way more people. It wasn't even close. I had way more people who regretted having abortions than regretted having kids. Not even close. And again, take that as take that for what it is.
Well,
But
you're
it's
not
telling you.
making a
Yeah,
political
yeah,
point. I understand
yeah,
that. You're making a data
yeah,
point. And what the politicization of
yeah,
everything, I think, has done, and this contention around
yeah,
around almost all subjects now, is it makes people fearful, even sometimes,
yeah.
to reference the
Right,
data and
right.
try to
What
pursue
it's a
what
great point.
we
That's
actually
a
do
great
know
point,
about a
because
subject.
I'll tell you what I know. I'll tell you what I don't know, and then I'll tell you what I know. So let's talk about on the abortion question. I don't know. I don't have any read on what portion of women who have had abortions regret having an abortion. I don't know that
Yeah,
answer.
that's not
I
in
don't
your
know. I don't
data.
know that. What I do know is that among the 16,000 people who submitted to this World Regret Survey, a not insignificant number of people had said having an abortion was a regret of theirs. And
Hmm.
that number was, it's not what I mean, it wasn't even close to the number of people who regretted having kids.
I think there is something so profound in the idea of not just admitting regrets. Of course, that's a beginning. Not just even talking about the regrets we have. Of course, this is all developmentally, directionally right. But as you say here, especially with this last idea we've just been talking about, to write it down, to list it, to think about it, not to dwell and consume with it,
Yeah,
but to face it, and to that there's fodder for meaning in this.
absolutely.
I think this to me is something, that's one of the actions I'm going to go away and take, is to create the photographic negative for a life that really matters to
Yep.
me, and so that I am armed with that insight about where my particular foibles are likely to be, and so that I can design around them deliberately, rather than being in the situation where you do get to your deathbed and then you say, well, now I have the regrets.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
You don't want to do
that's
that.
a bad time to have the information.
There's not, again, the idea here is that looking backward can help us move forward. But if you're at the end of your life, there's not much road left. So that's a little bit too late. Now, that said, just to be clear here, that when people get to sort of later in their life, what seems to happen is that even if they can't do anything about their particular regret, what they can do is transmit the lesson from that regret to other people, and that's powerful. So, which is
There's
which
a
is which is
perfect moment.
why like young people, I would encourage you to ask people who are far older than you, like, what's one regret that you have, and people will want to talk about this, and they actually want to share with younger people the lesson that they derive from that.
Are you familiar? I'm sure you must be, of the Bronnie Ware
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
course. Is Bronnie Ware, the Australian nurse, interviewed
yeah.
people, essentially had conversations with people on their deathbeds. Here are the regrets. The number one regret, not having lived a life true to yourself. Second was to do with not getting the balance right between work and family, and so on. But I wanted to end here on this. That you have in the book a sort of, I don't know if it's a postscript or the final chapter. I don't remember, but the idea, and it was based in a researcher. You'll remember who, that have sort of two narratives
Mm.
that one
Dan,
can
Dan,
can
Dan
can play
McAdams
in
of
life.
Northwestern University, and
Yeah,
as luck would have it, I'm wearing a sweatshirt from Northwestern right now.
it's a perfect
Yes.
moment. Tell us about what he found and
Yeah,
in that
it's very
context.
interesting. Dan McAdams is a personality psychologist at Northwestern, and he examines how narrative helps us form identity. And he says there are two reigning narratives in our lives. One of them is what he calls a contamination narrative, and one of them is what he calls a redemption narrative. Contamination narrative is things go from bad to worse. Things go from good to bad. This is it's in some ways the Garden of Eden is a contamination narrative, right? Things were great, and then they went south. The redemption narrative, which he says is the narrative at the heart of well-adjusted people, is where things go from bad to worse. I'm sorry. Things go in a redemption narrative. Things go from my explanation is going from bad to worse. Things go from um, uh, bad to
Bad to
good.
good.
That is, that they are redeemed. And he has some very interesting. So, and I think that regret is the ultimate redemption narrative. That we can take this negativity and use it as to chart forward. And really, at the heart of regret is narrative, because we're telling stories. We're traveling in time and telling stories about the past. We're looking to the future and telling stories about the future. And if we see our lives as a redemption narrative, that is, if we see our lives saying, you know what, things were bad, but I learned something from it. I redeemed it, and now I'm using that to go forward. Then I think we have uh, healthy, well-adjusted lives. And what McAdams says is very interesting. And I'll be curious, sort of as an immigrant to this country, McAdams. What do you think about this? McAdams has this notion that America is really built around redemption narratives. That America's story about itself is full of redemptive narratives.
Well, I just first of all, I love the contamination versus redemption. I love that. Um, I love that. I'm just thinking now about your question. I mean, there's something deep in Americanan, in America. There's something deep in Americana, in the culture of let's say it this way, like lots of people have bet against America and they bet and lose. In the end, there is something deep in the culture of redemption, and given that there was a Puritan movement and a lot of people came here, seeking a certain kind of
Right.
freedom, a certain kind of that I think is part of the explanation, and I think that there's yeah I think this ability to make mistakes, talk about it, move forward, you know, believing that there will be that good will eventually prevail. The very idea of the founding fathers, that language of a more perfect
Yeah.
union, the idea of, I mean, I've read not a little about the founding fathers and the impossibility of it all working, and yet it did. There is something really what's the word I'm looking for here? I can't find the word. It's when you aren't when you're resilient. The resilience of the American story, I think is
Well,
profound.
and I think,
And I see it now
eh,
too.
well,
I
yeah.
see it
I mean, I
here.
think
Go
that
ahead.
I think that America at its best is a redemption narrative because again, and I sort of agree with McAdams on that because if you think about what until 156 years ago, this country enslaved people. That's pretty freaking bad,
No, seriously.
And so
It's
how do you go from very very bad to something better? And your phrase "a more perfect union," I think, is the asymptotic aspiration of America. That is, we're trying to become more perfect, and the way you become more perfect is by reckoning with your imperfections of the past. And I think that's really important at a individual level, but I also think it's important at a national level. And if we have a movement in this country that says, you know what, we've been great all the time. What are you talking? We don't need to reckon with any of our mistakes or any of the things that we did where it was wrong. What are you talking about? That's anti-American. That is dangerous. That's as dangerous as it is for someone to say, I don't have any regrets. It doesn't matter. That's dangerous. That leads to delusion.
it seems to me that the whole conversation that we've just had writ large is what you're saying, and that there's two extremes that we have to avoid. We have to avoid a sort of contamination
Yeah.
story where we say, well, because there is bad,
Mm-hmm.
everything's bad and
Has
everything's
become
corrupt in
exactly.
every possible way. That narrative, I think, is very dangerous as a country. It's dangerous as an idea. It's dangerous. But so is the other extreme, exactly well described by you. Everything's always been great.
Yeah.
It's like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
It's the same problem. No regrets. There's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
regrets.
Yeah.
Nothing's
It's
been
on.
bad.
It's
The redemption story is in the middle,
right.
where you say, yeah, there's problems, but there's hope.
Right.
How did I remember a political phrase? You'll know who said it, but the idea that what's right with America is stronger than what's wrong
That's
with
Bill
America.
Clinton.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what is it? I'm forgetting what the phrase is. I can't think of what it is.
I'll
I
give you a
know. I know
moment.
what you're talking about. It's a very.
Speechwriter
It's a very good line from. It's a
from the
very.
vice president's
It's a
speechwriter.
very good line from Bill Clinton, circa 1992. Um, I hope you can find it because it's a great line.
Well, maybe we just find it.
Yeah.
Let's just do it.
No, I want to find it. There's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed. Can't be cured by what's right with America. That's it. That's a redemption narrative. And here's the thing about redemption narratives. And here's the thing about for individuals or for nations is that it's healthy. Okay, it's healthy. The other approaches are not healthy. One approach leads to delusion. One approach leads to despair. And so the idea of like you think of your whole life as a contamination narrative or your whole country as a contamination narrative, that leads to despair. Thinking that there's never been anything wrong, that is delusional. But saying, you know what?
Totally.
We can always go from bad to good. We can always go from imperfect to more perfect. That is health. Okay? That is how nations are healthy. That's how individuals are healthy.
It's absolutely true. And whenever you're in a situation at any point in a human system, personally, like intrapersonally, personally, interpersonally, team, organizationally, societally, any point in that entire stack of the human system that we Dan, you can't believe it. I started that line. It was so long, I can't remember what I was going to say. And at any point in the whole human system that we stop facing, oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say, that we have things that we just can't talk about.
Yeah.
Like as soon as you have, some families of origin have subjects that are so taboo, you can't. It's not that you can't talk about them; you can't even talk about not being able to talk
Mm.
about them. And as soon as you have that, you're damning progress. You have to be able to talk about these things. I mean, that's what the psycholiterature, the psychotherapy literature and experience has taught us over the last 50 years. That's the premise of almost all of the successful interventions are around the idea that if you create enough space, enough safety to be able to talk about the complex thing, the uncomfortable emotion in enough space, you can start to unravel it within yourself, and then you can start to take better action as a result of it.
Mm.
And it seems to me that we're now riffing on that, of course, at a societal level, but that's really what you're going for with the power of regret is create enough safety in your own world to take to take these actions we've just talked about, these little specific tools, to make a beginning so that you can unravel the regret and sort of, let's say, knit it, weave it
Mm.
into something more
Mhm.
meaningful,
Mhm.
into something that makes something beautiful.
Mhm.
You have the raw
Mhm.
materials. The regret is a raw material. It's not something to be pretended away. It's not something to be devalued. It's highly valuable raw material that can be utilized into literally into a life that really matters. I'll give you the final word.
My final word is to be your hallelujah chorus on that. Amen.
Dan Pink, thank you, and thank you really for being on the What's Essential podcast. And thank you for every listener. Thank you for being here. Really, thank you for listening, for being here again, for being a part of the What's Essential experience. One thing I'm going to offer for the first, let's say, the first 10 people who, if you like this particular episode, go write a review of it, send your review with your address to info@gregmckeown.com, and I will send you a copy of The Power of Regret from Dan Pink. That's a simple way of saying thank you for being here, and a small way to support this important book, which I'm sure will be, again, a tremendous bestseller and a phenomenon for you, Dan.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. That's a lovely gesture, and I appreciate this fascinating conversation.